después de guerra, by guerra may di World War II na, then después di man Yanovic como parte in America como Commonwealth, gi the America, starting in 1978, may natutunan din na hindi mafanan self-government. Todo sa, well, I guess I don't want to say todo sila sa bantigo asid bulag ito lokiti ti mag-realiza na for a very long period of time islata siya na binigi Pacifico di man mafananan Micronesia then in lugar is the Mariana Islands ni no agi ginigi sa Pacifico no as I have been saying for so many times now itototan no i-abilidad niya ni paggubernan maisa siya na gi-islata no man maamod ni i-masbet ko na nasyon siya gitano at that time in Europe no and we start off again with the person named Ferdinand Magellan that decided to take a trip around the world back in the 1400s, no? 1421, I think, is the year that he took. He circumnavigated the globe. Logi Magart, si Magellan mismo, no, he didn't circumnavigate the globe. Boti niya fanan ikakotodri test na batko ni Gaigi na no ibatko siya ni Momode. No, they made it back to Spain again. Lo, as you know, probably no, matay si Magellan in the Philippines, no? Sa mapuno ni Filipino gi sa tuwa fa na issue no what happened there. Lo, I mentioned that sa no Gubietnamentu i-taw-tawta ne sinatawag tawza. Antes di ufan matu European settlers they colonizers they colonized the islands. They basically know the people, the islanders had their own customs and culture back then. The bulagi custom niya back then is about 400, 500 years na distansya taptin no sila talo kiti mafnanan no sistema no i-try pa na i-taw-taw siya ni di bulay dun na taw-taw ni Manginin. The theory is that they migrated from Southeast Asia, either Malaysia or somewhere there in that area, and that was a very daring feat. People back then were really adventurous and very daring. So I want to try to keep on our topic of sistema Gubietnamentu than Esteban self-government because after Spain came on board and colonized the islands, the sistema Gubietnamentu basically is really the contingent force of Spain, which is really not that many, I think, at that time. I don't think there's more than 50 of those soldiers on Guam, for example. Only the rest of the Marianas, no, they thought basically, no, the unung kabantini at one point in time, manlaloli, manmungoy chief, then Espanyol siya na mamali for us ni mga Katoliko ta onra si adunan ni si Palisa Vittorius no gito Guam sama puno gida tomong gida Guam no apparently there's a conflict between the religious beliefs of the priests in Espanyol na then tauta gi isla tauta ni maung kesti siya po well Jesus Christ no sana na klase that there should be conflict. This is really a class of what class of civilization. I mean some people may say that North American civilization so solo back to just the notion of governing themselves within their tribe, within their group, as a group of people. They must have a system of, of settling disputes among them. And imagine it's basically you call them together. There's a chief, no? We've heard of a number of chiefs, Guam, then the Kipua, and those people,
Matuan, no? Matuan.
yeah. Pero then Carolinians, I can't really speak for the Carolinians because I'm not Carolina and I really have very little knowledge of the customs and culture. I imagine even for the Carolinians that came to Saipan, they have their chief, no? See, Aguro is one of them, I think, and he was a very respected and revered Carolinian chief, and he died, I think, and was buried in Managahan, no? According to Manjilutan no Refalawash. So the way they settle these disputes are through the chiefs, I think, and sometimes within the family itself. And so that was life back then. And even I think even in Spanish times, although we go to church, it's the mga Catholic and all that, no, we look upon our elders, Bilas tinay na mapnananidi customary respeto. Gubietnamentu ki lagi intelito tolta siya no what ni we look up to, no, as the person that we can go to and ask him to listen to our issue. Again, magana I don't really know the specifics again kwaman keep bagwi, but often bulusin lagi yung tatanong ni Otro how this dispute settled. I cannot get into that because I really don't have any specific knowledge as to how the chief But I imagine the chief, if he's a good chief, would try his best to make his people get along, no? I mean, Tibula, Tau no, the Provincial siya manmumumu kada dia da manaalya na tenkino. So that was the what we may call the prehistoric things that I surmise was the case. And then Spanish times, what happened? Do they have a court system? I don't really know whether they have a court system, but you got to remember that the Catholic Church is a very strong and powerful institution, and sometimes more so than the Spanish government itself. You know what I mean, huh? Okay. And got question, Glenn, just stop me anytime.
Not a question, no, para ato siya maniiko, go to Marianas Agupa YouTube, so maniga live. We have a minor problem with Marianas Agupa show in Facebook, so go straight to Marianas Agupa YouTube. Pagudi maniiko, winigi 100.3 broadcast, Maulika, tutudo i-broadcast mo ako. Malago po niga si Chief Justice De La Cruz. So ka-guess, ano ko ito i Marianas Agupa YouTube. It's live right now. Sige mo na, Chief Justice.
Okay. So I was talking about the Spanish priests and their influence on the people, and it's a very strong influence. Although it's a religious institution, it acts almost like a civil institution of government. And I imagine a lot of the soldiers looked out to the priests, especially mga Katoliko, no? No, may kung mamali offer dinansi na offerlasi, and good and bad, and good and evil, and offer isaw dan offer ti isaw. Sanya gi reglamentong gi madyo sa ti isaw na sa guan ben ni ilay sivit, no? Di sinatawag na tumisawin na logi ilay Katoliko, no? Yung stadium palaan na da kasawa mo, por ejemplo, no mapananan no uno gi 10 commandments, no? No adultery na, no? A long time ago during the Jewish time of Christ, no, the custom is to stone the woman. and that was a very harsh no punishment. So I'm not really sure what kind of punishment, what kind of offenses took place, but imagine the ordinary kinds of offenses that people go through in life na klase. Okay? Not anything technical or anything like that, like we see today because of the internet and everything like that. No, that was the Spanish for about 300 years of under the influence, and then came, of course, the German administration. But the German administration basically, what is it, from 1898 until about like 1914 thereabouts, about a 14-year period. 14 years. When you compare it to the Commonwealth government, which is already 44 years old this year, I think. No, that's uh, that's uh, that's a very short period of time. And colonizers normally, the caretakers, they come in, and it's part of this notion of we have our own colonies. And I don't know what they talk about in Europe about colonizers, but one of the biggest colonizers is Great Britain, of course, because it ruled the seas, as they say. As the best navy, the best maritime. They're all over the world. They went through Africa, they went to Australia, they went to all over the place. Kana toda ma-colonize gitano ni British. And then, of course, the French. The French colonized Canada and other places. I am in Mississippi right now. I mean, next door to me is New Orleans. The French Louisiana, they call it. They name it after King Louis. There's a whole bunch of Louis kings, from Louis the First all the way to Louis the 18th, I think. Is your Louis? So they name it Louisiana, the Louisiana Territory. And it went from down here in New Orleans all the way up to Canada. Can you imagine? Canada is French colony. But no, we were not colonized by the French. But I'm talking about colonizers. I mean, this is Europe, the age of discovery, they call it. Sounds nice and everything, but for the people that were colonized, it's not really not that nice. And so they move on. What kind of a legal system do they have during German administration? Basically, again, it's just the government taking care of the islands and trying to make as much products and revenue for the mother country in Germany. But their duration here is so short that it's hard to say that they really have much of an influence on our customs and our culture. Some of our people, some of our really influential elders, were given the opportunity to go to Germany. Can you imagine? Back then, in the early 1900s, as I understand it, si Tun Ilyas Sablan, Tatan Uncle Dave Sablan, Germany. I mean, to travel from here to Germany must have taken, I don't know, months, I think, to get get back to Germany. But he did, and was educated there and then came back. Kwakusitun Nasim Binaventilok is one of the people, but those are the names that pop up when people talk about people who took off during those times to study under, and then the Japanese came, and the Japanese administration is a very strict administration, and there's only it's a monarchy, but they call their king an emperor. It's a different term, same significance, I think. But the other thing about the Japanese emperor is he was looked upon as a deity. Talanzuus is the emperador upon. I mean, people look on him as both a civil and religious leader. The government good is the law somehow during the war and this notion of expansionism in the Pacific area and other places. Law when countries that are influential like Japan, Germany, Britain, all that, started expanding in the age of discovery. They sort of like it's part of this. I have a new Cadillac and yours is a BMW, but I own the Marianas and you own this, and all that. The Dutch were down in Monodeji Dutch di Malano, no Indonesia for that. Holland. Can you imagine a little country like Holland, no, governing Indonesia with about 120 million people? They came there and they were influential in that area. The system of government. I want to go quickly into this area of a post-war thing because Japanese the system of government is, I guess, if you do something wrong, they'll punish you.
Oh, okay. Sige,
Oh yeah, criminal law mostly. Criminal law because I'm not really sure there's much civil disputes. Manggagaya di no elders na among the people. Manggagaya they will look to and they meet with us and they tell us what's right and what's wrong and all that. So we get along quite well. I never heard of any big issue during the Japanese time because they were very strict, and when the government is very strict, people are afraid that if you do something wrong, it's malumos, you've heard of stories na di, ano magkupala pa, so fa baba na, kontra auto no, even the Japanese, they don't hesitate. Magotyo, ni kwatu na pulisya, na manano, gati na dako, alung kantaru da ni malumos o takino, magago dispensa or something to that effect. So, no, I'm not sure whether there was a court system. I think there was a governmental system that has a unit that adjudicates these kinds of things. So, after Japan, which was in the Marianas for about 40 years, from 1914 1944, the end of the war, no. Japanese, they were basically using the islands for economic purpose. And then, we're talking about the islands, I'm talking about the rest of Micronesia actually, Japanese, the Madro, Japanese, the Punape, Japanese, the Palau. In fact, in Palau, that's supposedly the capital of the islands of Micronesia for purposes of Japanese administration. Influence the Palau has been, that's where they settle themselves as the head of the government. The Northern Marianas basically, I think, is the economic aspect. Literally every square inch of arable land was used to farm and to cultivate sugar cane. Near to the Caravan Central Park, a monument, a Japanese sugar king. The Gagagagi Donkulun stayed on the statue because he really had an influence. And interestingly, he was educated. Next door here, he was educated in Louisiana, of all places. And guess what? Louisiana is one of the biggest sugarcane growers. He wanted to learn how to grow and harvest sugarcane. Si Matsue. Matsue. Si Mr. Matsue, gagi Donkulun the statue katan. Lo Americans in America na taught that that's where you learn how to get into this sugarcane cultivation and industry. So economic wise, it was a humming little Tokyo gita saipan. Legal wise, sistema again, like all the other colonial governments, from Spain, Germany, and now Japan. We don't have any power. Man, political or otherwise. Tada ni man mambota, tada ni tati, tada ni tanisidi apa tasogi ni tanota. No? Tada sa timan mo. Kasi the right is might. Might is right, rather. Sorry about that. But very lalaki pa we don't have to twist the words that might is right. Right? Might is right. So it's power. And we see that today, right this very hour, that being practiced in the Ukraine. But I'm not going to talk about the Ukraine because it's really a sad thing going on right there right now. But that's what it really is. Medgood, ako mas medgood. But sinawaw na lalango in 2 seconds. It's really to draw for mo na. No?
Yes.
So that's what's happening in the Ukraine, and it's really sad. We need to pray for the people of the Ukraine because it's really a sad thing. But anyway, I digress on that. After the war, 1945, here are all these islands that were colonized by all these different European countries. You know, a lot of them, the countries that were colonizing them, these islands, decided to just let go of them and all that, or they were placed. The United Nations had one of its councils, the trusteeship council, and its purpose is to really administer these islands that were colonized. And we are one of them, Micronesia. And they have three island groups in Micronesia: the Carolines, the Marshalls, and the Marianas. And Guam also is a part of the of the Mariana Islands. We were named after the Queen of Austria, Queen Mariana of Austria. There's man colonized it. So we were placed under a trusteeship, lump sum together, all put together, the islands of Micronesia, and we were administered by the United States. As I mentioned in one of your shows, I think, the United Nations decided to put these islands that were formerly colonized. Usually, the losing countries, the colonized these islands and territories in Africa, for example. There were like 11 or 12 new trusteeships around the world. All of them ended up already being either independent country or like that. Northern Marianas was the only strategic trust, because the United States said, well, we're going to ask for this and we're going to get it, I guess. It asked that it be allowed to use this trusteeship for strategic purposes. It was the only strategic trust for military purposes. So, but did they? I mentioned this, I think, earlier that about the only thing that they were using for military purpose was the Kwajalein missile testing range in the Marshalls. Of course, they also tested the atomic bomb there in the early 50s, and that had some serious health issues. And I don't know, I can't really talk about the compensation for the people of Bikini and then Weetok and those islands, lagoons and islands that were caught in the downwind of the atomic explosion. Those are radioactive materials that hit them, and some of them developed cancer. So going back to the trusteeship, the Northern Marianas then had this, and I mentioned this in my books, that we were placed under the trusteeship with the idea of the trustee, the government taking care of us. In this case, the United States would develop our economy, educate the people, get them ready for self-government or whatever political status they want to get into. And then, it's gini matisita from Lagunia Micronesia, the Marshalls, the Carolines, both Eastern and Western Caroline Islands. Those grupos in the Carolines, Sananza, Chuk, Juanpino, because Ryden and San Lago, Dayab, and Palam. So we went through these negotiations with the United States government because back in when Kennedy was the president, he he came up with some kind of policy that we should start getting these islands ready for self-determination because they cannot be forever under the trusteeship. A lot of it was embarrassing because a lot of the trusteeships are already being terminated, and people these places are getting to be independent countries, and the United States with Micronesia still hasn't really done that much to get the people ready. So it started this process slowly, and the next step was, of course, the 1965 when they established the Congress of Micronesia. By 1968, they established the Micronesian Political Status Commission. Okay, so let me backtrack now as I go into this political status talk and talk about the trusteeship in the Marianas and talk about the judicial system, the legal system back then, and they were placed under trusteeship back in 1948, I think, and all that. You know, in Guam, a large naval station on the base, is a Guam, the U.S. Air Force. I guess the military wanted to keep the Northern Marianas also as part of this chain. And so what they did was started training Chinese guerrilla fighters to fight against the communists in mainland China. But I mentioned that just to get a point in time reference to show what's going on. Meanwhile, the Navy was really administering the Northern Marianas, except for, correct me if I'm wrong on this, like Glenn, I keep saying that except for Rhoda. Rhoda was under the Department of Interior. It was never with the Navy, under the Navy, right? Am I right with that? I mean, it was the only island in the Northern Marianas that was not administered by the Navy. Tinian, the rest of the the rest of the Northern Marianas, Saipan especially, ni Navy, Navy, we have a lieutenant commander that's in charge of the entire contingent of Navy personnel on Saipan, and they started, giving out work for inativo siya, ita na itututano, man matututin, pwede mechanic, pwede grounds and labor, pamanagas ka, kantunsolan, pwede painters, pwede technician, pwede plumbers, pwede kapintero, todra. Istalay bulagi manangkota man mountain, lo bulag totota man matsusugi Navy. And then after that, and the Malam Interior in 1962, as a result of President Kennedy's decision to put back the rest of the Marianas together with the rest of Micronesia as part of this trusteeship, no mamove capital a trusteeship from Guam to Saipan, no? Kung familiar niyo no Glenn lo mamove kasi da ito ganun kaya pago yung capital i governor's office and the legislature. Siya naman legislature magayusin na niya yulo. Those buildings are all the buildings that were built by the CIA to house their personnel that were training the thing. Pagwi Navy, Tigobula na Navy personnel, they were running the administration down in Susupi na ito pa na gaigi kote. Supreme Court building and Superior Court building and gaigi police that area. No concept hats on this. The Navy, the president basically is a caretaker. And they allow us to do what we want to do, I guess. We even have our own mayor, and we even have Saipan Municipal Congress, they call it. That I mentioned in my book, some of these members. Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
No, what if there's one disagreement kay Manu Macedo i-dispute pero na tempo ni Navy.
Okay, I was going to get into that already. Here's the thing, they have they have a court system.
Oh, okay.
After all these years of 300 over 300 years of colonization, the first thing that the United States government decided to do was, aside from appointing a chief executive called the High Commissioner, it set up a court system, and it placed the administration of the islands under the Department of Interior. Now, you know that the Department of Interior is one of the federal departments or agencies in the United States government, no?
Yan.
The Department of Interior basically deals with the interior. And that's inside the United States, no? So in this case, they were taking care of something outside the United States, but so be it. I mean, Interior was given this authority, and Secretary of Interior appoints the High Commissioner, and the Secretary of Interior appoints there were 4 justices of the Cruz-Estoria-Ta High Court, and there were 4 of them, I think, if I'm correct. A Chief Justice and 3 Associate Justices, and the 4 of them were either stationed around Micronesia, one in Saipan. Usually the Chief Justice would stay in Saipan, then one in Palau, one in Chug, one in the Marshalls, I think. And they take care of cases over there. And what do they have for law? Because, we don't have a Congress. They don't have a Chinamay legislature at that time. What the United States government did was adopted a set of statutes that somebody, I guess, back in the 50s decided to put together a set of laws, statutory laws that would be used for purposes of administering the islands and for the court to follow, to use in administering justice. So we have a criminal code, we have a civil code, we have other statutes in the book. But you got to remember, usually statutes are enacted by legislators, right? I mean, the legislative bodies, there are 3 branches of government, right? I mean, executive, in the Republican form of government, you have the executive, the legislature, and the courts. The courts basically to decide cases. And what they used to decide these cases, they used it was a 2-volume code. They were just, two little volumes, but they contain all the laws that I guess they think they would need. And when there's something else that falls outside the bounds of those 2-volume set of statutes, they every now and then they would venture into what areas that is known as customary law. Esti customary na klase nila, i-judges na iti man, i-judges Amerikano ti man, puro siya apakane, they're from the States. They're trained lawyers, and they're acting as this, and they come to, imagine going to Palau, talking about the Ibidu and his powers in the Marianas or in the Marshalls, about the land tenure system in the Marshalls. They don't know what that is. So what they do is they have what is known as community judges that act as assessors. What do you call this? Expert witnesses, and they assess this for the judges of the High Court, and they tell, presumably because they're part of the court, they would tell the judges what the law, what the custom is and culture, and then they'll take it from there. So in the, and believe it or not, the High Court, for all that it did a fairly good job, I think, in administering that. But it was as a caretaker type of judicial system. They have a reporter system where the judgments that they issue is followed with court opinions. These are writings that you could read the court opinions about On the marshals of Temano, Eroids, Mustad Kilo, pues, I get confused with the Eroids in the marshals and the Ibido in Palau. No, no, then below that, there is a second layer of upper class, the marshals, believe it or not. And then after that, the I forgot the name of the last people in the group, the everyday laborer and all that. No, so the judges of the High Court, the justices of the High Court, and they try these cases and render opinions, often in consultation with the assessors that are part of the court system. Assessors are the local people knowledgeable about customary law in the islands, in their respective islands, and they do that. So it's really interesting, and I think our court has set of this reporter system and the code, the trust territory code, as they call it, with one supplement that they go. So that's the system of law that they have. Okay, now,
So bring us forward to today now.
huh?
Doing a trust territory time and all no justice, right?
Let me just have one more thing to add on the trust territory time. One ay di mafinalan community court judges.
Oh,
Ito ko familiar niya, no. It's of like traffic cases.
oh,
Madakyon no kandi gitenda na makukunyolong yes judge no adda situn one adda. But after that, Situ Ninashi, the former mayor, became district judge. They call them district judges or community judges, and they listen to cases and they right then and there, like, oh, sige, malamuto, $5. $5 a lot of money back then. 25 cents back then, you could buy yourself a whole lunch at the store. So basically that's it. Manamuto na tawag pa rin apasi mutamo pero tawag pa do restitution. Every now and then there be a major case. So manyonggi gumataw-taw, which is rare, but it does happen every now and then. And then of course sometimes the culture itself acts as a deterrent for people from committing crimes or doing something untoward towards your neighbor. Any concept mahlo na no Glenn? It used to be a very very important aspect of our culture. Sti mahlo ponli si tatamo na makalabuso gi kaidi gi pressure na is a very shameful thing. That itself causes people to think twice before they do anything wrong. Then and this is classic. Then of course the church is still strong. The church that came in with the Spanish are still with us, with our people, with the American priests and all of that. So religion also plays a role in this. Okay. Do you have a question, Glenn? Before
yeah, hold on. Let me just tell the caller. We're going to be opening the landline. If you have any questions, so just stand by until our speaker finishes his presentation. Okay, stand by. So go ahead.
let me just quickly go into and this is really a very skeletal discussion of the system. So when I came back from law school in 1974 and started working for Micronesian Legal Services Corporation, which is a legal aid program, there's hardly any large number of lawyers on the islands like we do today. It was basically a lawyer or two in private practice. Back then, it was Bill Neighbor, started off his law practice, spending a lot of his time on the Micronesian Claims Commission, war claims thing. Then Michael White was one of the early lawyers, and I understand Mike, still in good shape and still practicing law. He's become an institution, really, in terms of private practitioners in the islands. And there was me, Justice former Lieutenant Governor Borja, the late Justice Villagomez, the late Pete Atalik. No, we came in at about the same time, a year after we started. They came in a year later, si Ray and si Pete. And then we practiced law before the Trust-Territory High Court. And it was interesting because, you were trying to convince the court at trial or on appeal, about some of these land issues. But they have this particular statute in the Trust Territory Code that says that, if you fail to claim your land for 20 years, then the government owns it somehow. And we argued and argued against that, but the court just decided that it would not side with us. I mean, it's amazing. That's one of the few faults that I think that the court has. It was supposed, under the trusteeship agreement, the administering government, the United States or the trust territory government, is obligated to protect us, the natives, from the loss of our lands and resources. And when the government is saying, well, this is not your land, even though you're claiming that it is, and it probably is, but because 20 years has already passed, then therefore it's no longer yours and it belongs to the government, that's really unfair. And so that's one of the reasons why the Marianas Public Land Corporation was formed, to reevaluate and review these issues again. And if it's really like government land, then give it back to the proper owner. And I think for a lot of people, some of them have really benefited from that. Let me go quickly into the present system. Glenn, after the Trust Territory High Court, we started self-government. And what do we have under our Constitution, the CNMI Constitution? We provided for a gradual system, judicial system. I guess I don't know why, but they decided that maybe there are not too many lawyers on the islands to start manning the judicial system. And so they started off slowly and made the U.S. District Court for the Northern Marianas a CNMI court also. Can you imagine that? A federal court acting as a CNMI court? Well, they did just that. The covenant provided for that. The Constitution implemented it, I guess. And the jurisdiction of the court, the so-called, originally called the Commonwealth Trial Court, was really a court of limited jurisdiction. In other words, it doesn't have the authority to decide cases for every range of cases. It's limited to what the punishment is provided for, up to 5 years imprisonment. Up to beyond 5 years, if a statute calls for 10 years, that's not in our jurisdiction. That's the jurisdiction of the district court, the federal court, acting as a local court. And it was unusual. Judge Loreto was a judge back then, and he took his job seriously, of course. He was one of those fine judges that I met and was fortunate to have known well, and I'm sorry that he has already passed away, but he's really a real gentleman. But, I guess that's his jurisdiction, and so that's one thing. The other case is the amount in controversy, in a civil case where the amount in controversy is over, my God, I think it's 5,000. I forget already. Boy, my memory. That's one thing about old age. Your memory starts receding and all that. I think anything over $5,000 or $10,000, if you're filing a case for $15,000, you're going to end up in Judge Loreta's court. Judge Hefner, who used to decide cases for the Trust Territory Court, doesn't matter how much it is, $1 million or now has to go back to $10,000 or less. Can you imagine that? Now, 5,000, I think, is for the Commonwealth Court. It's probably small claims. I don't know. I got to talk to Mike White about that. But anyway, so that is one of the most interesting thing that they did. under the covenant, so that there's a progression. And then, when I became a trial judge back in 1885, thereabouts, then the jurisdiction expanded. Now it's unlimited jurisdiction locally. So if it's a case that arises under Commonwealth law, it doesn't matter whether it's $1 million or $5,000. It all goes to the Commonwealth Superior Court, the trial court. But appeals still go to the district court acting as an appellate court. And what they do in the appellate court, I don't know. Is this making any sense for you, Glenn? Because it could be, yeah. You have to try to make it as much as possible, understandable to the lay person.
Yeah.
When you go to a
It's
court,
difficult to understand, but I can put the dots together.
when you have a case tried before the trial court is the one that takes the evidence, right? You present your case, you put evidence, you call witnesses, and all that. In the end, the judge decides the case. There's allowance for jury trial, but that's a different matter. They hardly use it. And they say everybody knows each other and siphon. And therefore it's hard to have a non-biased jury. So anyway, when I became a trial judge, now we have complete jurisdiction as a trial judge, as a trial court. And one of my first cases was a first-degree murder case. When I came on board, there was a case going on, and I was assigned to the criminal docket. And the first case that the Chief Justice showed me was, he looked at me and said, "Joe, this is your case now." And I said, what case is that? And he said, "This is a first-degree murder case." And so, oh Lord, so that was my first case. But my point is that now we have complete local jurisdiction. Local cases no longer start going through the thing. But our cases, the cases that we decide in the Commonwealth Trial Court, even though we have general jurisdiction, as they call it, unlimited, will still be reviewed by the Federal District Court, acting as an appellate court. As an appellate court, they have 3 judges. And the other judge usually comes in from one of the federal courts, Hawaii or California. And one of the Commonwealth trial court judges that did not decide that case would sit on appeal. So here's an awkward situation where you're deciding a case, decided by your own colleague in the Commonwealth trial court. So when I sit on an appellate court and we reverse a case, for example, and it's a case by the chief judge of the trial court, I sort of like stayed in my office for a day or two. You know what I mean?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Justice De La Cruz. We have about 8 minutes before we close our show. We're going to open for question Q&A.
Yeah, we probably could do this again later on, but let's open it up to questions because.
All right, so let's open the Q&A. We have a caller on the line. Go ahead. Your name, please. Okay, let's give him the floor to answer part of that question about NMD Article 12. Pilik mo? Okay, malad na tanong sa times limited, may paro answer si Justice. Mano malago mo pinena paro na address. Ako na question. Okay, all right. Thank you, Neno Caller. Okay, Justice Urugukaze, question.
Hello, can you repeat that? It's very no.
Within your opinion, Neno, Article 12:11, the customary law na isiyata puti indigenous rights.
The Article 12 and customary law
Hindi kaya papaisin is the caller.
and indigenous rights. I'm not really sure as to what he's asking in particular. Is he asking
How
whether
to proceed with local
Article
interest.
12? Yeah. Well, I mean, the Article 12 when they were negotiating the covenant, and that's why it's in the covenant. No, ito nagay covenant na the Article 12 because the negotiators to the covenant were talking about our lands, and they decided that there should be some kind of limitations on who could acquire land in the Northern Marianas. At least for the covenant allowed for the Northern Marianas to the limited ownership to persons of Northern Marianas descent, and the reason that was stated, I mean, among other things, aside from the notion of that the land is scarce in the Northern Marianas. I mean, we're talking about
That's Article 12. Article 11, public land. How do we protect ito ta interest kano siya man maikila siya sa nako?
Boy, you got me there. I haven't really thought about that. I used to be general counsel for the the first general counsel for the Northern Marianas Public Land Corporation. And basically, at that time, we were just trying to get a hold of all the lands that we supposedly own. Northern Marianas under the Constitution, the land belongs to people of Northern Marianas descent. I think it's the way it's defined in the Constitution. And so, when I came on board back in 1979 or thereabouts, I went up to the Cruz-Estoria-Ta Office of Lands and Survey, talked to the chief of the Division of Lands and Survey, the late Kozo Yamada of Panape. I said, Kozo, please, he said, it's all yours. I said, what's all ours? And he said, well, all the lands in the Marianas. And I said, well, where are they and what are they? And I said, well, what we need are some documentation. And we need maps. We want maps showing all of these so-called public lands. And so we know what we're dealing with. That's Article 11. And even Article 11 talks about something that we don't own. Article 11 of the Constitution talks about submerged lands, I think, also. We presume that we own the submerged land. We found out later on that it doesn't even belong to us. And I said, what's going on? Isn't this something that should have been discussed during the covenant? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not part. I never was a member of the negotiating team or participated in that. But we have had that issue, and as you know, Glenn, only recently did the U.S. Congress had to give it back to us at least 3 miles.
Yes, okay, and that's appropriate timing to ask that question, Justice, because time is of the essence here. And generally, they gave us the first 3 miles from Ininitsetsu. Una is the Trisvita Suzu. No, from 3 to 12, what is the understanding when do we?
I don't know.
Or no? Because
we're not. I mean,
we don't manage that 12 from 3 to 12, no?
Yeah, I don't know on that. I have to look it up, Glenn. That we're talking about the issue back then that was raised, I think, by one of our people or several of our people is the Magnuson Act. There's a name for that act for the 200-mile exclusive economic zone that every place has, and that wasn't mentioned in the covenant as far as I'm aware of, and I can't figure out why, for example. And as you know, the Associated States of Micronesia, the FSM, Palau, and the Marshalls all have exclusive 200-mile exclusive economic zone. Why the Northern Marianas? And why wasn't this raised at least, if even if it's not 200 miles of exclusive economic zone, maybe 100 miles, for God's sake.
Thank you so much again, no, Chief Justice. This concludes those
I'm sorry.
Jadi tanawan at mesi tanat dos oras stick out show next time, ha?
Glenn, need to cut 2 hours or 3 hours, but when ningay now missing issues because there's so many issues involved that we could discuss it night and day and talk about these things and find out, not in an accusatory fashion, but in terms of 20OY, for example, did the United States just object to the notion of us owning the 200 miles exclusive economic zone, for example? Okay. And the Article 12 thing, Glenn, I know you wanted to talk about that also at some point. And that thing, all I can say right now is Article 12 is already settled law in the federal courts. It's up to the people of the Northern Marianas to decide really how to approach Article 12 to accommodate its present status, its present condition, and the people in it, so that we have a system of inclusion rather than exclusion, so that we can all be fair to each other, you know.
Okay.
I hope what I said during your show today helps some of us in trying to get a feel and understanding of the system of laws and the judicial system back then. The government legal system na sa guilty mo na gimagay para stop it all with the Supreme Court and the Manasway Appellate Court system, district court. We became completely a local court, both trial and appellate. The Supreme Court and the Superior Court now are completely Sierra courts, and we have this federal, state, commonwealth relationship with the federal courts, of course, and we get along with the judges of the federal courts and all that. But like the states, we have our own court system already that is independent of the federal courts. Next time, if we talk again, I'll talk to you about the Constitution, why the territories of, for example, Guam, Virgin Islands, still to this day don't have their own constitution. And you ask yourself, why is that? Anyway, that's it.
Okay, and we'll be sending you an invites again soon. And si Reed, no, Justice,
okay.
I
just hope what I say in your show, Glenn, helps shed some light on some of these issues to our people and even to outsiders also.
Yes, of course. Para imani ko, mga manmalipa na siya umalumang di Marianas Agupa Facebook, so fill out a survey. Kay manumas may para ta-improve this tipo programata.
Yeah.
Ratio na siya no ma-possibly participant answering a question. Ustalo said mas bisiklata si Mr. Former Chief Justice Jose de la Cruz ay hansuti tempo niya para atinganit para istoryasit na istorya justisya ilay itutunta tempon Espanyol nuhud esta tempon Japanese trust territories and presente po ito manusia may maniligra siya argumento gelo komunidad unos dan otros de las dos más todo el tiempo como justice.
Thank you. Then my regards to our people back home. I'll be back again this year sometime.
Okay, yes, of course.
All right.
Jesus Masi talo no si former Chief Justice Jose de la Cruz lo motto it importante para tahutsum programata pa na Sabado. Inna na lokian zon donkulu na si Jesus Masi ko todo. Mga man malifa na i-amot minzo, i-Bravo Pharmacy and Wellness Center, garapan kang manzalokwi i monesty dandan. Okay, gua gini buenas pudi esta para tapan nga. Okay, go ahead, Phil. Okay, está. Esta si Zeus Mosi neno. All right, para ako loki Phil, decreasing 2 si Zeus Mosi. The loki i klema na ini na patutujan sa ginin i Joten Markets and Department Store shop loco shop Joten una malefan neno. The mokti ora ne para tahutsum ipugamata panelos pago na bonito sabalo. Adios. Talo ginin i programan Marianas Agupa i Historia si Mariano Iglesias si Zeus Mosi at Turirat. Si Peter sinyaha umalo mo si Mana ni mokto ginin bumi ay. Si Gwelutin, Gwenao Papa Luta, bolos tao trubiay si Gwelutin puri bula si asunto pago. Senator Singh Gwenao Papa Tinian, the mga man malefan na anunsyo na talangnos para municipalidad Tinian, okay? I-fiesta, tika-festa gi matutun gi Matsudia 11. Si Isidoro Cabrera tipo posible loki pago lo tapan sige mo nagbini di po gamata hasta 8 Sabado irregular show si Zeus Mosi talong guaho si Glenn H. Manglo niya inagwayza inafa maulig zampas para turudo samzu adios ugwayza hamzu esta 8 Sabado